And I gave her the biggest hug that I could. And when she saw me, she's like, "Oh man, finally somebody, somebody I see that's on my side. Somebody I see that's on my side."
Right, they can relate.
She was getting hit with everything left and right, and I just said, I hugged her right, and I hugged her. I said, "I'm so proud of you."
Today, we have got a story that is sending shockwaves throughout the entire WNBA, with stunning new claims and unexpected developments thrusting both Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham right into the national spotlight. Lately, fans are starting to ask some very serious questions, and these latest behind-the-scenes revelations have the potential to completely shift the narrative. What is actually going on in those locker rooms, and why has everyone suddenly started whispering about it? Stick around with me until the very end of this breakdown as we unpack all of the fresh details, social media reactions, and every key piece of information you need to understand. So, without wasting a single second of your time, let us dive right into the heart of what is really going on behind closed doors. The kind of story they never wanted you to hear does not begin with an official press release or a flashy headline. No, it starts with a simple hug. When Cheryl Miller threw her arms around Caitlin Clark, it was so much more than just a sweet, fleeting moment caught on camera for social media. To the outside world, it looked like a simple act of kindness and compassion. But to those who were really paying attention, that embrace completely shattered something much bigger. It sliced right through those carefully built walls of silence that had been constructed to protect one of the most troubling under-the-radar operations in the history of the WNBA. Because that single hug was a whole lot more than just standard post-game consolation. It was a bold act of defiance, a massive statement, and a clear signal that their targeted campaign had finally been exposed to the entire league, the veterans, and the shadow players pulling the strings. The rumors and whispers had been quietly circulating for months on end. Far too many hard fouls were being ignored, and too many voices were suddenly going completely silent. There were just way too many moments when Caitlin Clark, arguably the most influential rookie this league has ever seen, was left entirely out on an island, unsupported and actively undermined. Once the fan base and media analysts started taking notice, certain league insiders began leaking details of what sounded far less like typical rookie hazing and much more like systematic psychological warfare. Within those quiet circles, they supposedly gave this coordinated effort a name, calling it Operation Balance. And the moment Cheryl Miller stepped forward, even if it was just to share that brief, public embrace, she instantly validated exactly what a lot of people had suspected, but had never been able to prove. That Caitlin Clark was dealing with a lot more than just normal on-court competition. She was battling against an entire institutional system that seemed custom-designed to break her confidence, steal away her spotlight, and push her out of the spotlight of women's basketball. But the moment that curtain was pulled back, that single hug changed the entire dynamic. It exposed the massive holes in a carefully crafted storyline that the league offices had done absolutely everything in their power to hide. And once you look behind that curtain, there is a coordinated plan so incredibly calculated and harsh that you will honestly never look at the WNBA the same way again once you see how all the pieces fit. The deeper you dig into this, the more obvious it becomes that none of this was a fluke. This was not just bad luck, nor was it the usual physical welcoming that first-year players get. Based on what several league insiders have shared, this entire situation was carefully mapped out, systematically executed, and driven to completion. According to leaked internal communications, there was a highly organized effort specifically designed to contain and limit Caitlin Clark's rapid rise. We are talking about real, physical, written records originating from inside the organization itself, and the official label on this agenda was Operation Balance. The main goal was to guarantee that absolutely no individual athlete, no matter how skilled or widely popular they might be, could shift the established balance of power in the league away from the veteran players. To make this work, Operation Balance relied on three core pillars. First, minimize Clark's footprint in the media. They had to make sure her on-court achievements were consistently overshadowed by louder storylines about veteran players. They needed to control the media headlines and actively redirect public attention. The second pillar was to allow aggressive, physical targeting with zero repercussions. This meant referees deliberately turning a blind eye to obvious fouls, labeling dangerous plays as just tough, old-school defense. The third pillar was to isolate her emotionally. This psychological tactic was far more damaging than any hard foul on the hardwood. The goal was to cut her off from teammates, strip away potential allies, and slowly erode her self-confidence. This is incredibly troubling because it went way beyond the game of basketball. This had absolutely nothing to do with protecting a legacy or guarding the hoop. It was a calculated effort of mental warfare disguised as regular athletic competition. And this is the exact part they desperately wanted to keep hidden. According to our insider sources, this was not just one rogue team or a couple of angry veterans taking matters into their own hands. This was a highly coordinated, systematic initiative that was greenlit at much higher levels than anyone ever suspected. After all, you cannot break a rising superstar with just one hard hit. But if you slowly wear her down day by day, she will eventually start to doubt her own abilities. And that is precisely how Operation Balance was designed to operate. But as it turns out, the fatal flaw in this plan did not actually come from Clark. Instead, the cracks began to show because of a major slip-up, an unscripted, unguarded moment where someone in the inner circle ended up saying far too much. And that key person was Sophie Cunningham. Because the truth is, every single conspiracy eventually hits a breaking point. For Operation Balance, that breaking point was a massive slip of the tongue. Sophie Cunningham, a player famous for her hard-nosed, aggressive style on the court, had no idea she was about to leak the biggest secret in the entire league. During what she assumed was a completely private conversation, she let slip some deeply disturbing details. This slip-up provided clear evidence that the rough treatment Clark was receiving was not just random, but part of a highly organized, deliberate strategy. Sources close to the situation claim that Cunningham acknowledged the message had been received loud and clear inside that Phoenix Mercury locker room. We are going to show this rookie the real meaning of playing in the W. At first glance, that might sound like a standard rookie welcoming, just some seasoned veterans putting the new kid to the test, but look closer. Caitlin Clark did not actually need to prove herself in that moment. The entire point of the exercise was simply about sending a message. Far from being spontaneous, those warning words carried the heavy weight of a deliberate strategy. The Phoenix Mercury were preparing themselves for something far bigger than a basketball game. They were getting ready to execute a coordinated demonstration, one that had been quietly greenlit from high up in the league. Phoenix transformed into the official testing ground for Operation Balance right after that locker room decree went down. Out on their home court, this was no longer about random physical plays or traditional heated rivalries. The entire experiment was highly controlled. Every hard blow, every dirty look, and every single whistle that went unblown was part of a much larger plan to see exactly how far they could push Caitlin Clark before triggering any red flags. And that is where the evidence becomes absolutely undeniable. What Cunningham let slip lines up perfectly with the secret documents that eventually came to light. The overall pattern, the specific language, and the clear intent all point in one direction, and Phoenix was not acting alone. They were merely the very first link in an entire chain of command that stretched across the WNBA. According to multiple league insiders, identical marching orders were handed down to at least 6 other franchises. The exact same directive whispered in locker rooms all across the country. Protect the veteran players, keep the rookie completely isolated, and never let Caitlin Clark's massive fame overshadow the established hierarchy of the league. Suddenly, all of those seemingly unlucky physical plays did not look so random anymore. These were definitely not your standard rookie growing pains. The sharp elbows to the ribs, the blatant deliberate trips, and the eerie silence from her own teammates during her hardest moments on the floor. These were highly calculated moves in a shadow game that Clark never agreed to play, and Cunningham's slip of the tongue blew the whole thing wide open. What basketball fans had been whispering about on social media for months was suddenly confirmed by one careless remark. Caitlin Clark was not just dealing with elite competition out there, she was walking straight into a coordinated ambush. But while words can reveal the intent behind the plan, the cold, hard numbers that followed would prove it beyond any shadow of a doubt. Because you simply cannot argue with the raw story that the statistics tell us. Sure, you can brush off online rumors, and leaked conversations can always be easily denied, but numbers do not lie. When you lay it all out, the paper trail from Caitlin Clark's rookie campaign does more than just raise serious questions, it completely blows the lid off Operation Balance. Back in 2024, Clark drew an average of 4.5 personal fouls per game. That is significantly more than any other high-profile rookie in recent memory. To put that into perspective, first-year players typically expect to bear the brunt of some heavy physical play. Taking hits is just part of adjusting to the professional game, but never quite like this. Clark was not just adjusting to the league, she was being targeted and punished at a rate the sport had never witnessed before. And this is where the situation stops looking suspicious and starts looking statistically impossible. Caitlin Clark, all by herself, was the target of 17.1% of every flagrant and egregious foul called in the entire league. 17%. Just let that sink in for a second. Nearly 1/5 of the most dangerous and hazardous fouls in the entire WNBA were concentrated on just one single rookie. That is not bad luck. That is not some random coincidence. That is active coordination. The statistical probability of this happening naturally is almost non-existent. It is the mathematical equivalent of flipping a coin 100 times and having it land on heads 80 times. At some point, you have to stop calling it random chance and start calling it what it actually is: intentional targeting. And it was not just about the volume of the fouls either. The precise timing of these hits was incredibly telling. A huge chunk of these hard hits came at moments specifically designed to rattle or humiliate Clark on the court. It was a deliberate pattern of disruption, striking whenever she started heating up from the field, when her team, the Indiana Fever, gained momentum, or right after she made a spectacular highlight play. These were blows designed to hurt both physically and mentally. Even her very first bucket in the league, which should have been celebrated as a major milestone, was quickly overshadowed. Instead of rallying around a generational talent who was lifting the sport, opposing teams chose to double down on the physical punishment. The numbers proved that the very moment Caitlin Clark proved she belonged on this stage, the intensity of the targeting ramped up even higher. It was as if her success triggered the next phase of this operation. And according to league insiders, that is exactly what took place. Based on leaked communications, Operation Balance did not tap the brakes once Caitlin Clark proved she could handle all that physical pounding on the court. Instead, the plan shifted gears. Simply hitting her harder was no longer the primary tactic on the table. It was about digging even deeper, because the league had a much more subtle plan waiting in the shadows. If hard fouls could not break her spirit, they had to pivot, because every major scheme has a backup plan ready to go. Operation Balance was no exception to that rule. This was not some chaotic, unorganized effort. It was definitely not spontaneous. It was designed around 4 very deliberate, structured stages, and every single one of them was meant to push Caitlin Clark right to her absolute breaking point. Phase 1 was straight up physical intimidation. This was the most obvious part of the plan, the opening act of the show. Make the rookie feel every single physical blow, leaving her wondering if her young body could even survive the brutal demands of this league. Late elbows, excessive fouls, and brutal screens that clearly went too far. And yet, referees on the floor tolerated it all, acting as if they had suddenly gone completely blind. The underlying message was that she did not belong here. Phase 2 was silencing the media. If Clark and her career both somehow survived those heavy blows, they immediately transitioned to their next weapon: silence. Her records were quietly hidden away, and her highlights were downplayed to support the established narratives. Prominent media figures who had previously praised her suddenly flipped the script, repeating eerily similar talking points about how she was completely unprepared and highly overhyped. This was not normal, natural criticism. This was pure control over the narrative. Phase 3 was emotional isolation, and it was easily the worst stage of all. League insiders claim that Clark's teammates were actively instructed to avoid her. She received absolutely no encouragement during huddles, zero celebration after she made major plays, and absolutely no support when she was fouled hard. This was clearly orchestration, not simple indifference. Just look at that viral video of Clark flat on the floor after a brutal foul while her teammates actively looked away. The main goal was incredibly straightforward, making her feel completely isolated in a league designed to destroy her. Phase 4 was a total psychological breakdown. The physical game had very little to do with this brutal final stage. The absolute goal was to break her mind. Leaked conversations describe emotional exhaustion procedures, a deliberate tactic of constant negativity designed to drain Clark completely until she questioned absolutely everything, from her own talent to her role, and even her future in basketball. If she decided to leave the league on her own, their job would be fully accomplished. Each stage built directly on the previous one. First, bruise her body. Next, starve her of the spotlight, and then completely remove all emotional support. And finally, make her doubt herself so deeply that she might just walk away from the game completely. This four-step destruction strategy was almost successful, but the brutal genius of Operation Balance extended way beyond mere planning. The real power lay in its subtle nuance. On its own, none of these stages looked like a conspiracy. But when combined, they formed a pattern that was far too exact to ignore. Still, the true damage was happening in ways that ordinary fans could never see. Off the court, inside the locker room, and deep in her own thoughts. Even as Clark persevered through the physical blows and the heavy silence of the media, because hard fouls and headlines had absolutely nothing to do with this operation's next layer. This stage was entirely about depriving Clark of basic human connection, which is infinitely more important. If Caitlin Clark's body was bruised during Phase 1 and her voice was silenced by the media in Phase 2, then Phase 3 went far deeper than either of them. Because the next target of Operation Balance was her soul, rather than just her game. According to team insiders, Clark was purposefully excluded from the very spaces designed to foster connection and trust. She was never invited to team-building group chats. Her voice was completely absent from the leadership sessions where veterans provided feedback. Without her, team dinners and various bonding activities took place off the court in total silence. Just consider that. Imagine a rookie entering a locker room, only to be greeted by cold shoulders and empty space, all while she struggles to establish herself in a new league under the incredibly heavy burden of enormous expectations. That goes far beyond isolation. It is artificial loneliness. Furthermore, it was no coincidence. According to those close to the matter, veteran players were allegedly given explicit instructions to not get too close and to avoid sitting next to her during meetings. When she falls, do not pick her up and actively keep her from feeling like a member of the squad. The psychological damage of this treatment was catastrophic. According to one witness, there were times when Clark would just sit quietly while her teammates joked and made plans together. According to a different source, Clark secretly began to wonder if choosing basketball was a mistake at all. That was the true extent of her alienation. The video is self-explanatory. Just recall the widely shared video of Clark sprawled out on the court after an incredibly vicious, blatant foul. Her teammates were caught on camera looking completely away, and not a single one reached out to help her get back up. While fans attributed it to poor chemistry, deep insiders claim that the moment was purposefully and carefully orchestrated. To maximize her humiliation, we were seeing Operation Balance in active play, publicly displaying her total seclusion, and the brutality did not end there. It is reported that seasoned players kept a close eye on Clark's emotional state, actively searching for any weaknesses they could easily exploit. Was she worn out, frustrated, or self-conscious? These personal weaknesses were immediately viewed as open opportunities. This was no longer a simple contest. It was pure psychological warfare, and the impact was exactly what the operation had planned. Consequently, Clark began to back off. According to people close to her, she questioned her actual role, wondered if she was even wanted, and seriously thought about leaving the game completely. And this is the incredibly dark reality. Clark did not have to completely lose it on the court for Operation Balance to succeed. All she really had to do was quietly cry on the inside. Because raw skill by itself cannot save you once. Doubt takes hold. And yet this entire process was never fully completed. They had much more than physical hits and emotional abandonment ready at their disposal. What they actually had planned was a massive, coordinated assault that reached far beyond teammates, dragging in game officials, the media, and the entire league itself. It would have been devastating enough if Operation Balance had simply concluded with those physical assaults and complete isolation inside the locker room. But her teammates were only one small piece of the grand strategy. As the pressure climbed higher, referees, commentators, and media voices were drawn in with startling accuracy. Referees were allegedly operating under subtle yet obvious pressure. According to close league insiders, opponents got extra leeway to make hard contact with Clark, while officials ignored her frustration and whistled her for every borderline infraction. And the statistics prove it. Referees routinely overlooked blatant physical violations committed against Clark during her first campaign. Elbows, heavy hip screens, and shoulder checks regularly sent her flying down to the floor. But the moment she reacted by throwing her arms up to express her deep frustration, the whistle blew instantly. A quick technical foul. Two different standards for the same play. It was not just bad officiating. The whistle was under control. Referees were not the only part, though. The media was just as influential. According to highly confidential leaked notes, specific talking points designed to actively undermine Clark's historic rise were sent to prominent WNBA figures, including Cheryl Swoops. Phrases claiming she is overhyped, she needs to earn it, or she is not ready for this level began popping up across platforms and were repeated verbatim in several live interviews. Since the message was so consistent, it could not be a coincidence. This was nothing short of deliberate narrative engineering, and this quiet collaboration went even deeper. Veteran players from various teams leaked private group chats that exposed highly coordinated social media campaigns. Coordinated posts designed to completely overshadow Clark's best highlights. Tweets designed to cast serious doubt on her resilience immediately after highly physical games. Interviews structured to divert focus back to the league's established veteran players. Fans soon noticed this recurring pattern. Every single time Clark experienced a breakout moment on the court, there was an instant, loud, and uncannily coordinated pushback, almost as if everyone in the basketball ecosystem, referees, veteran players, and analysts alike, was following the exact same script. One insider called it total warfare. Reputational attacks in the media, psychological warfare in the locker room, and physical hits on court. Caitlin Clark was no longer just a rookie basketball player. She was fighting a massive army that dominated every single aspect of the game. And yet, the media spin and those physical fouls were not the most damning evidence. The real turning point came when someone finally dared to deviate from that corporate script, sparking sheer panic because one legendary figure simply refused to comply. Furthermore, her decision to publicly support young Clark was about much more than just simple consolation. It showed fans exactly what true mentorship looks like, completely tearing off the operation's mask. Silence enveloped Caitlin Clark for months, while colleagues actively averted their gaze. Referees allowed the hits to accumulate, while media commentators used the same worn-out talking points to chop her down. One element was essential to Operation Balance her complete isolation. Then, Cheryl Miller followed. When Miller stepped onto that court and gave Clark a massive hug, it was far more than a simple act of kindness. The script had suffered a massive, seismic fracture. Along with showing her many fans what real, genuine support actually looks like, that single moment exposed how completely artificial Clark's loneliness had been, making the sharp contrast impossible to ignore. While everyone else chose silence, one legendary player chose empathy. One legend revealed the absolute worst flaw in the entire enterprise by giving Clark the validation she had been systemically denied. Their plan could only succeed if absolutely no one dared to break formation. Instead, there was an immediate, powerful rippling effect. Veteran players who had complied in silence now started to feel fear. Prominent media figures immediately went on the attack against Miller, accusing her of giving in to Clark. This hostile response was not only severe, but highly coordinated. And that blowback is what made the conspiracy far more obvious than any leaked memo ever could. The massive system they had constructed around Clark was real, yet dangerously brittle if a simple hug could generate this much mass commotion. The narrative that Clark's struggles were just a normal part of being a rookie was completely shattered by Miller's public stance. It proved her isolation was entirely manufactured rather than natural. By standing directly next to Clark, Miller changed the course of history by showing fans and future stars what real mentoring actually looks like, lifting up the next generation rather than trying to tear them down. And since Operation Balance was built on that one central concept, it was disastrous to keep Clark isolated to break her spirit. But that plan fell apart the very second Miller intervened. The embrace was much more than simple consolation. It served as a shield. It was a powerful defense against their psychological warfare, proving that Clark was no longer fighting this lonely war all by herself. But exposing the operation was not enough. Even though Cheryl Miller stepping in gave Caitlin Clark some desperately needed breathing room, the hidden gears of Operation Balance just kept on spinning in the background. The tactics shifted, taking on a much quieter but absolutely no less dangerous shape. What happened next made it crystal clear just how desperate the league was to protect its traditional pecking order at all costs. In a fair world, that warm hug from Cheryl Miller should have ended the whole ordeal right then and there. This moment should have made league officials finally realize that freezing out a single superstar was not just cruel, but completely unsustainable. But Operation Balance did not die, it simply adapted. Almost immediately after Cheryl Miller showed her public support on the court, the entire strategy behind the scenes took a swift, calculated turn. While the blatant physical hits became a bit harder to spot, the psychological warfare dialed up to a whole new level. Instead of getting blasted by flagrant, bone-crushing hits, Caitlin Clark began facing a cold shoulder behind closed doors. She was subtly iced out in team huddles, run out of plays to keep the ball out of her hands, and left completely unprotected when teammates ignored her on defense. The physical toll was still very real, but now the blows were delivered in ways that were almost impossible to catch on camera. Meanwhile, away from the arena, the public relations machinery went into overdrive. Loud talking heads across sports media suddenly flipped the script, trying to convince everyone that none of this was actually aimed at Caitlin Clark. Television pundits claimed she was simply cracking under the immense pressure of the professional game. Studio analysts kept pushing the narrative that her visible frustration was just rookie immaturity rather than a healthy reaction to systematic unfairness. It was textbook, nationwide gaslighting of the highest order, and that is exactly when the league office itself stepped into the arena. Behind closed doors, questionable fines and subtle rule tweaks began to tilt the playing field. She would get hit with a quick technical foul for the absolute smallest complaints. Meanwhile, when opposing players practically tackled her to the floor, refs would routinely downgrade those dangerous blows to simple, everyday common fouls. It looked like a calculated effort by the league to slowly bleed her momentum dry, burying the ugly truth beneath a mountain of minor, deniable incidents. No single call seemed terrible alone, but together they were overwhelming. And fans definitely took note. Clips of Caitlin Clark getting brutally flattened without a single whistle started blowing up all over social media, while the moment she so much as glanced toward a ref in frustration, a whistle would instantly blow against her. Online threads began meticulously tracking these calls across multiple games, proving this was a pattern far too consistent to be dismissed as a coincidence. The whole debate surrounding her rookie season shifted completely. People realized this was no longer just about teams playing tough, physical defense against a star. This was a highly coordinated campaign to slow her down, a campaign that continues to this very day, yet Caitlin Clark remained absolutely bulletproof through the entire storm. She kept draining ridiculous shots, showing up night after night, and dragging her squad to improbable victories in games they had absolutely no business winning. Every single bucket she made felt like it was worth far more than just 2 points on the scoreboard. It became an act of pure defiance, undeniable proof that no matter how complex the league scheme was, they could never erase her incredible talent or quiet the millions of passionate fans screaming her name. And that, more than anything else, was the exact part of the equation that truly terrified the league. Caitlin Clark was no longer just keeping her head above water, she was actually picking up steam. Armed with Cheryl Miller's backing and fueled by the growing fury of her fan base, the national narrative began to shift dramatically. The very campaign designed to tear her down was now working in reverse, supercharging her popularity and turning her into an even bigger star. It gave her journey a thrilling anti-establishment vibe that her loyal fans absolutely adored. And that brings us directly to the real heart of this ongoing battle. Operation Balance never actually stopped. It simply changed shape and kept moving forward. Every single night, Caitlin Clark steps onto that hardwood. She is fighting in a war that stretches way beyond the game of basketball. It is a nightly struggle to expose a rigid institution that is absolutely terrified of progress. Now, the only remaining question is how far the league office is willing to go to protect itself. What started out as a simple, heartfelt hug on the court has now fractured into a massive fault line, tearing right through the very foundation of the WNBA. On one side of the divide, you have an established league desperately clinging to its old ways, completely terrified of what might happen if a revolutionary new superstar steps in and rewrites all their traditional rules. Opposing them is a relentless competitor who absolutely refuses to bend, even when the entire system is stacked against her. This Caitlin Clark story is about much more than just a single rookie dealing with criticism. It is a raw, real-time look at exactly how those in power scramble to protect themselves when threatened. It shows how powerful organizations, whether they are in politics, big business, or professional sports, will manipulate, control, and distort the truth just to keep the scales tipped permanently in their own favor. But the passionate fans are the one variable that no backroom scheme, strategy, or referee whistle can ever control. At the end of the day, leagues do not get to decide who becomes a legendary icon. The people do. And right now, Millions of passionate viewers are tuning in, watching closely, and demanding to know why the most exciting young star in basketball is being treated like a threat to the league instead of its greatest asset. That is the critical choice looming on the horizon. The WNBA can try to tighten its grip, silencing any dissenting voices and hoping that Caitlin Clark eventually crumbles under the weight of the relentless pressure. Or they can choose to embrace everything she represents, which is a much bolder, more exciting, and incredibly lucrative future than this sport has ever seen before. Either way, Caitlin Clark is not sitting around waiting for their permission, and the clock is ticking. With or without their approval, she is actively writing her own history, dominating play-by-play and headline-by-headline. And the final question is incredibly simple. When sports historians look back at this pivotal moment, will they remember the WNBA as the league that bravely embraced its bright future, or as the stubborn institution that tried to bury it?